We have our first guest here on Locked On Syracuse. Let's hear from him in a moment.
You are Locked On Syracuse, your daily podcast on the Syracuse Orange, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome, everyone, to Locked On Syracuse. I'm Jackson Holzer, and we're joined by Locked On National Recruiting Analyst Brian Smith to talk some Syracuse football. And Brian, you are actually our first guest here in the new era of Locked On Syracuse. How does it feel?
It feels pretty cool, man. I didn't think that I would ever be the first guest on any of these shows, so I've accomplished a new task. There we go.
Well, Brian, I was recently hired, so welcome aboard. You're the first one.
I'll take it, brother. Anytime I can get a win, I'll definitely take it.
Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. New customers join today and you'll get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. Brian, lots to talk about here with Syracuse football. There's a lot of optimism here. It's a new culture of Fran Brown. What are your impressions of him?
Active, very high energy. I've been around him on the recruiting trail. He's always a guy that's happy, kind of a young spirit, if you will. To say the least, based on Syracuse's recent recruiting history, they needed an injection of life. Fran Brown's a pretty good guy to do that. He's got connections to New Jersey, New York, and he's also coached at UGA. He's recruited in South Florida, where Syracuse, when I was growing up, 80s and 90s, they used to get a lot of South Florida kids. Jacksonville, Orlando, they get kids from all over the state. That has dried up in the last 10, 15 years. I don't know why, but they always used to get those kids. They don't anymore. So maybe he could be the guy that kind of be the conduit to more talent heading to North New York because they need it. That program needs more talent across the board, pick a position. But to do that, it's about relationships. You'll hear me say that a lot every time I come on this show. If you don't win in the relationship game, you don't win in recruiting.
I think, Brian, to your point about getting those players, Syracuse in the last 10 years or so, they couldn't get anyone, period. This was a program that was take your pick on what you want to use, transfers, you want to use high school kids. When they couldn't get anyone, they were outside the top 80 in the country, bottom of the ACC every year. Now all of a sudden they're kind of creeping towards the middle of the pack of the ACC. How do you think that's going to change their season for this year and going forward?
I need to see it just like recruits do, but if they can get year one to be 6-6 or better, they make a bowl game, then that gives Fran and his staff, and he's got some good guys on the staff to recruit too, an opportunity to say, okay, here's our mission. We want to be a bowl team. We want to be a contender, etc. Year one, we didn't have the players we necessarily wanted, but here's what it looks like with you on the roster and this guy and this guy and this guy. We can be elevated. We need you to help us. This was just the basic footprint. That'll be their mission, to at least get to a bowl game. I would be shocked if they're not going undefeated this year. Let's go out on a limb here. They may never go undefeated. It's hard to win there, but they can certainly make it to bowls. They can certainly be competitive. I've seen it. I've seen it when they were really freaking good. So I think this is a really important year, as goofy as it is, because nobody, like where I live in the South, and this is not trying to be funny, if you said point out the state of New York to a kid that lives in Alabama, South Carolina, Florida, some of them literally wouldn't know which state it is on a map. Now, if you ask them where Syracuse was, they wouldn't know what state that's even in. So at that point, you've got to do something to grab their attention. And if you don't, it's not going to go well. So hopefully for Fran and his staff, they can have some memorable moment, even if it's just one. That game, you're a 2-touchdown underdog. If you go on the road and beat and pick the school, maybe they beat NC State or whatever it is, that gets some national attention on like ABC and NBC and ESPN, et cetera. That can carry some water for you to get you into the recruiting season, to get some kids that otherwise you probably weren't going to get.
Well, another guy, you mentioned the Syracuse staff. Well, they got another one on their staff that's a big-time recruiter, and that's Elijah Robinson for Texas A&M. What should Syracuse fans know about him?
He's a guy that's seen everything in the SEC, and if you've recruited in Texas, you've pretty much seen it all because that state's as heavily recruited as any, and A&M was trying to have the top class every year. They went after the elite of the elite. They were in the middle of the NIL game. They were in the middle of everything. So he's not going to get any side ball, any curve ball, anything you can think of to throw him off. Makes it easier. But more importantly, again, the state of New York is not a hotbed. Like in basketball, it is. New Jersey, New York, you can just recruit there and hoops. Like Boeheim forever was good. Now you've got to recruit Texas, Florida, et cetera, the South for the most part, even if you are Syracuse. If you could just pick up 1 or 2 kids a year from the greater Texas, Louisiana, Arkansas area, they would be at a much better place. You add like 8 guys to your roster right now that he would have had at A&M. Think about the roster that they would be going into spring ball with at Syracuse. That's what you hire guys like that for. And more than anything else, I tell this to people all the time, college football is 80% recruiting at the top.
I agree with that.
It's unfortunate, but like Kirby talked about it after they curb stomped, yes, pun intended, Florida State. It's about recruiting high school kids and not having a relationship with your own family because you're gone all the time. Doesn't sound friendly, and it's not. I've got friends that are in the coaching profession, but you have to be willing to sacrifice your own personal life to benefit the institution you're representing and being compensated very well to do so. They're making a ton of money now. Compared to what they used to college coaches, it's a totally different gig, but it's hard. So get 1 more Texas kid. Fran's going to get a couple of kids out of Florida. I guarantee it's going to tick off people in the Sunshine State where you're from and I used to live. That's too bad because it's about relationships. He hired guys that could go do that. He can do it. You've got to have a little bit of a roundabout on where they're from. You don't want just one area. Atlanta as a kid, here or there, they're going to get because, he was at UGA. They recruited Atlanta hard, so that'll be another spot. He'll have coaches that have connections to all these places. That's how it works. Texas is kind of a unique one, though, because I don't even think I remember the last time Syracuse got a big-time kid out of the state of Texas. Maybe that changes now.
Maybe. Well, another concern that I have, this is my one area of concern with bringing in these guys who are big-time recruiters like Fran Brown and Elijah Robinson. It's one thing to be a great recruiter. Like Fran Brown was named the best recruiter in the country. He was named that. We can't take that away from him. But it's one thing to recruit for yourself and another thing to recruit for the man. See, Fran Brown, he's recruiting to play ultimately under Kirby Smart. And I understand that even though he's going to spend time with these kids and everything like that, you're ultimately trying to convince a kid to, this is the guy you're playing for. So how do you think that impacts Syracuse recruiting? Do you think that might take away from him? Are you concerned about that at all?
That's an interesting question, and quite honestly, a really good one, because every kid is a little different. I'm not going to mention who it was, but there was a kid this last year that decided on Alabama, and the reason he told me it wasn't like necessarily his top choice. He knew it would be harder, but he knew it was his best path to the NFL because of their coaching staff and everything else. He was a little bit different. His gears grinded differently than some others. There are other kids that told me it was all about comfort and just where they felt comfortable. I think that's a pretty dumb idea. I think it's the polar opposite. Comfort doesn't always lead to the most success, but a lot of kids do that. So you got to be able to balance that with each kid in your recruiting approach. And the way you do that is you got to be able to estimate, okay, what's this kid want as early as possible? Not just what they tell you, but like what they do, what their parents say, their high school coaches. And again, Fran's recruited in Atlanta. He's recruited in Miami and Orlando. He's seen different kinds of culture, and he's a New Jersey, New York guy. So I don't think he's going to have a problem anywhere from like the 757 just outside of DC all the way up to where Syracuse is at. And he's got deep South connections. He knows different kinds of kids. Now he's just got to be able to say, okay, yeah, I haven't been a head coach, but I know what it's like to be around Kirby Smart. That's got to help, right? Guy's got 2 rings. Right. He was part of Bama's run. He was the DC under Nick for, I think, 8 years. I think it's pretty safe to say he's the guy. So now you just got to pitch it under your regime. Like, we're not there yet. Again, you have to help us get there. We don't have enough talent. You just have to be honest. Don't lie, whatever you do, because the field is going to show the real results. So I'm sure they're going to get beat down a couple times this year, but they should win some games too. Just be honest and kind of take care of itself from there.
Well, Brian, we've talked a little bit about the new culture of Fran Brown. There are two guys right now, two guys that I can't believe I'm saying this, that two 5-star players Syracuse is in the running for, and we're going to talk about it right after this. Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. For those that are listening, welcome back here onto Locked On Syracuse. I'm Jackson Holzer. We're joined by a very special guest, Locked On National Recruiting Analyst Brian Smith. We just talked about the new culture of Fran Brown and recruiting and what it's like to now be the man as opposed to recruiting for the man. Now, speaking of which, Fran Brown, we're already seeing his impact with recruiting. Syracuse is now if you look at the latest rankings, top 25 in their latest transfer class, top 40 in their latest high school class. And there's two guys for the class of 2025 that Syracuse is in the running for, two 5-star players. Their names are Winston Watkins and Ty Jackson. Let's start with Ty Jackson. So what I've heard from him is he's the number one inside linebacker in the country. Brian, A, does Syracuse have any sort of chance? And B, what should Syracuse people know about this kid?
I think he is a player that is kind of underrated in the sense inside linebacker. Here's what I mean by that. I would label him as football player. Now, what does that mean? You could, if you wanted to, and your team had a guy injured, even at the college level, you could put him at running back for a week. If you wanted to play him in the slot as your nickel guy, Jackson could play that. If you want him to play will, like most people probably project him, weak side linebacker, that's fine. But on 3rd and 8, if you want to put him on the edge and rush the quarterback, that's cool too. Football player. That's number one. I don't give a crap what his ranking is at any position. The film doesn't lie. The way the kid runs, he's a track athlete that'll hit somebody. He's a grown man. I feel sorry for the mothers in the stands watching him hit running backs this fall. But at the same time, he's a South Florida kid, man. Look, you and I, we have a lot of experience in the state of Florida. South Florida kids in particular, they don't shed a tear. Downhill, he will hit you, and he can cover in space, so he's a 3-down guy. Those are the reasons that he's one of the top linebackers in the country. Who's number one? I don't care. I would take him right now if he said, Coach, I'm only coming to your school if I can play running back. I would take it. He's that kind of athlete. He'll figure it out. That being stated, does Syracuse have a chance? If he visits, the answer is yes. Fran has all those connections from recruiting in Broward County and the area that he lives in. I guarantee you he's getting him to visit because of the relationship. If I got a nickel for every time I said relationship on one of these shows, I would be retired, living on the beach, earning 20%. It's everything in recruiting.
I mean, you've said relationship a number of times already. I think we're stacking up those nickels. See, I have this glass cup here that I showed on my latest episode for unrelated topic about Syracuse basketball somehow making March Madness. It's meant to symbolize the glass slipper, but no one has a glass slipper. And so my point is that if you, to your point about nickels, I think we'd have this cup filled up with nickels by now. 100%. The amount of times you've said relationships matter.
Fran wouldn't get anybody to come up to Syracuse if he didn't have the personality he does. He's just a fun guy to be around. Now it kind of helps that he's coached DBs and stuff at the University of Georgia. Let's not kid ourselves. Kids will tell you every time, what do you want from a school? I want the guy or the staff that gets me to the NFL. It's like a broken record. Cool. Fran has been around guys that have been drafted at UGA, and he's also been around Kirby. He's also been around Schumann, maybe the best linebacker coach in the country. All these things are going to help him. I'm not shocked, but I've been around Fran, and I know the Georgia program because I study him a lot. I'm not surprised by that. This kid's doing his homework. I can actually give more respect to Ty than I do the fans because he's looking at it from a broad perspective. He can pick any school he wants. He can pretty much pick up the phone. There might be 5 schools that are already done at linebacker or aren't going to take one. That'd be about it. Everybody else, he can pick up the phone and he can go wherever he wants. Syracuse is going to play early, and he's going to be with a guy that's been around big-time defense. I'm not really that surprised, to be honest with you.
Well, awesome. Well, I guess that's encouraging news for Syracuse fans. Let's move on to the other guy that they're interested in as well. I believe they made their top 10 list, and that's Winston Watkins, a 5-star receiver. So same question about Ty Jackson. What should Syracuse fans know about this kid?
We call him Winnie. I've known him since he was in 8th grade when he was playing with Cam Newton's 7-on-7 program, and he was a 15U kid, and everybody knew Cam was flying him up from the greater Fort Myers area just for practices. Like, he was a priority kid. Yes, he's his family member. If you know the name Watkins in the NFL, receivers, yeah, that's the same family. He's a guy that can fly. He's very twitchy. Winnie is really good with his routes. He's a kid that takes it seriously. He's been at IMG for the last several years. He is a kid when I go to practice. Ironically, I'm getting ready to be at IMG to watch one of their workouts and see this kid again. I don't even pay much attention to him when I go to IMG because I don't need to. That's for all the good reasons. He does what he's supposed to and scores touchdowns. That's simple as it gets. He's as good or better than any other slot receiver in the country. And if you wanted to, he could play some on the outside as well. Don't get hands on him at the line of scrimmage. He's an elite player. As for Fran Brown, he's a guy, again, he's recruited Florida for Georgia. Everybody knows him. Any kid in the state of Florida, Syracuse is a threat to, at minimum, get them on campus. Fran will kind of get that door open. Now, he's going to need a lot of help from his staff, and I don't know his staff top to bottom, but at the same time, we're talking about a guy that he understands recruiting. I'm going to guess that all his guys have some kind of recruiting acumen and or a hit piece in terms of a state or a city they can get to. Fran can get this done in South Florida a little bit himself. He's been to IMG multiple times. So I think it's kind of interesting because at one point, Winnie was committed to Colorado. He backed off that. He could go to Georgia probably or whatever. I mean, it doesn't really matter. He's got a ton of opportunities. Syracuse could steal one here. Winnie is not a kid that's really afraid to go out on a limb. He committed to Colorado when they were terrible.
Well, to be fair, it was with Dion.
I know, but did you see that roster?
I know. Hey, that's a good thing. Ultimately, that's a good thing for Syracuse. I mean, you said it. I mean, the fact that we're having this conversation speaks volumes to what we alluded to or we talked about earlier, which is the new culture of Fran Brown, where he's not messing around here. We're not saying here, and Brian is not coming on the show saying that, yep, Syracuse is getting these 5-star guys. They're guaranteed to get them. But this team is now in the door. And that's really all you can ask for, right? I
mean, coming in the door, what else are you going to expect? The recent history of their recruiting and their win-loss record is not favorable. So getting guys like Watkins or Jackson, any of these guys on campus in any capacity this early, if you're a Cuse fan and you don't think that's a win, we need to have some really hard conversations. They're probably not going to make you very happy and might make your psychiatrist very rich. But the point is still the same. They're getting in the door with 5-star kids. Did you expect that when you start thinking that I'm going to come on this show, start talking about 5-star recruits with Syracuse?
Nope.
And you shouldn't have because you're sane. Because you're sane.
I see them now on Twitter, and I'm like, we made the top 10 for a 5-star, and I'm looking at the other schools, and you got Georgia, you got Bama, you got LSU, you got Florida, you got Notre Dame, you got all these other schools, and I'm like, one school doesn't look like the other here. But hey,
that's true. It honestly does.
One school doesn't look like the other, but at the end of the day, say the magic word.
It's relationships.
Relationships. There you go. And Fran Brown certainly building a lot of relationships along with everyone that recruits for that Syracuse staff, just like Elijah Robinson. When we come back, it's time to talk about the main man that Syracuse picked up in the transfer portal, and that is Kyle McCord. We'll be right back after this. Get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Because right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. Bet on all your favorite NBA players and teams with quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and more. And hey, we've talked a lot about Syracuse football on this show and recruiting. Well, if you believe in them right now in year one under head coach Fran Brown, you can go on FanDuel and bet the Orange to win the ACC outright. Right now, the odds are at plus 4,200. Just visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn and shoot your shot. FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NBA. Jackson Holzer here on Locked On Syracuse. We're back to now talk about Kyle McCord, and we're joined by Locked On national recruiting analyst Brian Smith. And I know that Kyle McCord isn't necessarily a high school recruit, but he was someone that Syracuse picked up in the transfer portal. And Brian, what was your initial reaction when you saw that Kyle McCord had committed to Syracuse?
I was like, oh, I didn't see that coming. He's a St. Joseph's prep kid out of Philadelphia, so the area is not shocking. Syracuse should always be relevant with the greater Eastern Pennsylvania area. That's certainly the case. But I didn't think he would go to a school that wasn't a prominent name in college football. He was at Ohio State. Now, obviously, he was kind of run out of town by the fact he got beat up. Ohio State fans are brutal. That being stated, he still threw for a lot of touchdowns, a lot of yards. So I'm curious to see what offense they try to run for him and who's the guys running the routes. I don't know anything about Syracuse's roster, but they're going to have a little cachet because McCord's a very well-known guy who's Elite 11 quarterback, etc. I'd imagine he's going to be pretty well hyped up by the Syracuse administration and, SIDs, etc. I hope he does well. Big arm pocket kid. I don't know if Brand's got a specific style he wants, but he kind of picked one with Kyle because he's definitely more of a pro-style quarterback. Now, who does he get the ball to? I need to find that out myself, but that's one guy you don't have to worry about. You got a quarterback.
Well, the main man that he's going to hopefully get the ball to, and hopefully he's healthy, is Oronde Gadsden. That's the. I
mean, when he got hurt last year, that sucked.
Oh yeah, See, here's the problem with Syracuse over the last few years, and I appeared on Locked On ACC, and we talked about Fran Brown there. It's not necessarily the high-end talent. And don't get me wrong, the high-end talent for Syracuse is not as good as these other schools. I'm not trying to say that. But the high-end talent, when you look at Kyle McCord and Oronde Gadsden versus pick another school in the country, the gap isn't as high as you might think between those two guys. It's what happens when, Oronde Gadsden goes down in week 2 and there's no one else there. They can't you can't replace him. Whereas another school, Georgia, Alabama, look at the top of the ACC, we'll go to Clemson, Florida State. They can easily they got the next man up. It's that simple. With Kyle, he's a quarterback. You can't just replace a guy like Kyle McCord. You can't just replace him if he were to get hurt. My concern, Brian, and I agree or disagree with me on this one, the offensive line. And I'm not going to ask you about specific personnel, but McCord is not a very mobile guy. Do you think that he can run into some problems with the O-line of Syracuse?
I think anybody could. I think the Flash could run into some problems with Syracuse's O-line.
Okay.
But at the same time, I mean, they were bad. They need somebody that can make good reads, and part of that is making reads at the line, the right checks, getting in and out of the right plays, the right protections. Maybe he does a better job. Maybe there's a better mesh. That's why you have spring ball and you work throughout the summer before fall camp. Also, I'm hoping that not only with what they've had already, that there's another transfer portal window opening. The 16th of April. I'm going to go out on a limb and guess that everybody on Syracuse's staff is curious about that window. Even if it doesn't have to be a Ronde, but they can get somebody else that can help that roster and maybe be another playmaker. You know what? It's not over yet because it's 2 weeks where you can change your roster. So Kyle may get another playmaker. Maybe he gets another pass protector, whatever it may be. So there's a ways to go, but I think they're in a pretty good spot considering where Syracuse has been. It could be a lot worse than having Gats. Like, come on. I mean, how many guys have like Aronde's listed as a tight end? He's more of a receiver.
I call him just you said football player in regards to Ty Jackson. I just call him a weapon. I just call Gadsden a weapon because I don't know if he's a tight end or if he's a receiver. He's just kind of, I mean, he's not Kyle Pitts, but that's kind of like the general.
He's in that style though.
It's that style where it's, if you watch Kyle Pitts at Florida, he's not a tight end. He
was a big receiver.
He's a big receiver. He's a weapon. Gadsden's not on Kyle Pitts' level, but that's the style that he's at.
Yeah, I would say Johnny Wilson from Florida State would be another good comparison. So he was like 6'6", 6'7", 235. They listed him as a receiver, but most schools would have listed him as a tight end. Does it really matter? No, he scored touchdowns.
As long as he can get the ball in the end zone and make everyone happy and Syracuse wins football games, you can be whatever position you want. Isn't that right, Brian?
That's exactly right. So maybe that's the key. They need somebody like that. It's important for him on a side note from recruiting. You need somebody like that to be mentioned. Awards, NFL draft, top plays on ESPN. That stuff matters. You see those edits on Twitter and Instagram and stuff for these different accounts. That stuff matters too. Football is about social now. If the recruits like it, you have to find a way to give something to them that they like through that with your branding. Syracuse needs to see Aronde score some touchdowns and do some videos with it, see him like top contender for the Mackey Award or whatever it may be. So that's another way they can elevate the program under Fran Brown.
Well, Brian, I appreciate you taking the time. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
I think that Syracuse football is going to be a little bit better with Fran Brown. I'm curious about it. Got a long way to go, but they're starting well. It's here now. They need to grow with that roster with the recruiting.
Well, baby steps, Brian. Baby steps. We're coming, though. We are coming. I appreciate you taking the time, and we'll be back on Friday, everyone.